Good evening and welcome. I'm Jesse Lazar. I'm Executive Director here at the American Institute of Architects, New York, and the Center for Architecture. And it's really a pleasure to welcome you to What Could Mamdani's New York Look Like, which is organized by N+1 magazine. This event is part of the Center for Architecture's ongoing commitment to fostering meaningful dialogue and collaboration around the power of design to shape our communities. For those of you less familiar with us, AI New York is the largest and oldest chapter of the American Institute of Architects, representing nearly 5,000 licensed architects, allied professionals, students, and design enthusiasts here in New York City. And the Center for Architecture was founded in 2003 by the AIA as the first ever cultural institution founded by an AIA chapter. The Center for Architecture, we engage local and international audiences with the value, impact, and wonder of architecture. Through exhibitions, advocacy, and educational programming, we advance the value and practice of architecture to promote just and sustainable communities. I'm thrilled tonight to welcome you all here, and also Mark Krotov, the publisher and co-editor at N+1, along with Colin Vandenberg, senior editor at N+1, who will introduce the rest of our speakers tonight. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Let me just start with a couple thank yous, and then I'll kind of explain what we're up to here, what we hope to be up to at least. First, we did an event here last year with the Center for Architecture, and it was so amazing. We had a great time, and we're just like so grateful to be doing this again. It's just a real thrill for us to leave Brooklyn and to come to Manhattan. There's so many cool things happening here. Just like quick thank yous to the folks that we work with particularly closely here at the center, Katie Mullen, Megan Edwards, and Jesse Lazar, of course, and Lynn Kim and Bria Donahue at the AIA. Very, very grateful for kind of the smoothness and I'll say it, the elegance of the collaboration. Really appreciate it. And at N+1, huge thanks to Lisa Borst for our amazing graphic here and much else, and to Danny Oliver, Alan Dean, and everyone else at the magazine. Okay, what are we doing here? N+1, you may know us more these days as a machine that generates discourse about media salaries in New York, but we also do produce a magazine from time to time. The magazine is concerned with literature and politics and the arts and the intersections of all those things, and in sort of perennially trying to take stock of the contemporary, however dark it might be and wherever it might lead. For a long time, we've been interested in architecture and the built environment. It just seems like that's a pretty big part of the contemporary. And certainly interested in spectacular moments in electoral politics, one of which transpired a few months ago when Zohran Mamdani won the New York Democratic primary. So that kind of sets things up a little bit. And then what else? Well, we sort of thought, once some of us, and particularly Colin, were involved with the campaign, and so there's a lot of excitement. But then, once excitement, I guess, was actualized, that gave way to, maybe a slightly deeper level of hope, excitement, fantasy, play, inspiration, and it started to become fun to think about these things and, the implications of a Mamdani mayoralty and of a social democratic mayoralty in slightly more practical and granular terms. For me, kind of the story started with a visit this summer with my daughter and with Mariana and her husband and their son to Riverbank State Park. Amazing, complicated, messed up, beautiful place. And I hadn't spent time there in a long time, but was just totally, we just kind of wandered around and went into these like amazing, beautiful 80s public facilities. They just like really look like nothing else. They're like half postmodernist, half modernist, very municipal, extremely beautiful. And that's a place that has a very a kind of complicated legacy, and a legacy that can't be reduced to a single strain of a single political administration in New York, a single political moment, and certainly not a single design tendency. And and it made me wonder, could Mamdani, like, what are going to be the sort of the built legacies, these complicated legacies of Mamdani? And of course, they won't just be his because not because of collectivity, but also because things take a long time to build in New York. And so how to attend to these things, how to attend to the sort of long, slow slog of literal building and coalition building, practical building, and also how to attend to a certain amount of play and fantasy and utopianism. Well, we brought on the experts to address that. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Colin Vanderberg, who's senior editor of N+1.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you all for being here. So thrilled to see so many of you here, and of course, thank you to our brilliant panelists. Yeah, I think Mark framed things very well, but I think just sort of, further kind of stepping back and thinking about what we're here to talk about and think about together is, just that we're in this remarkably exciting and contradictory political moment, here in New York, certainly, and if you've had, a chance to talk to people or knock doors or really come into any kind of contact with the Mamdani campaign, I think there's such a sense of mobilization and possibility and opportunity on the left that hasn't existed for some time. But of course, it's coming amid nationwide repression and a sense of sort of political sort of crisis and impasse. And so trying to kind of hold those contradictions together sort of constructively in several senses is a big part of our purpose here tonight. And I think, more concretely, so much of the Zohran Mamdani sort of platform and the energy around his campaign has been, I think rightly, sort of focused on, oriented toward the kind of everyday experience, lived experience of living in New York, of paying rent, of raising kids, of riding the bus, and I think we're here, to think also about, again, at a sort of visual and tactile and built level, what that city might look like, might feel like, and how it might be constructed. And I guess one way that I've been, maybe a slightly cute way that I've been thinking about this is, there's this famous line from the architect Cass Gilbert, one of the sort of innovators of the skyscraper, who described a skyscraper famously as, quote, a machine that makes the land pay, which is, sort of eloquently, dystopian and succinct, and also sort of a kind of complimentary quote, possibly mistranslated, but we won't get into that, from Le Corbusier, who describes modern homes as machines for living. So this language of sort of machines and mechanism. So I guess one way I'm sort of thinking about our discussion here tonight is to sort of imagine, urban spaces and city resources as sort of machines for solidarity, machines for equity and affordability, and again, there's further sort of layers than that. But I think as we kind of try to again sort of frame our thinking tonight, that's one way I think we can do it. So I'm really thrilled and honored to introduce our panelists, and we have, to my left, Cindy Katz is a cultural geographer. She teaches at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and has written widely on questions of social reproduction, the workings of the security state in everyday environments, and the intertwining of memory and history in the geographical imagination. Next to Cindy is Mariana Mogilevich, editor-in-chief of Urban Omnibus, the Architectural League of New York's publication dedicated to observing, understanding, and shaping the city, and author of The Invention of Public Space, Designing for Inclusion in Lindsay's New York. Next, we have Samuel Stein, a policy analyst who writes about the politics of planning and housing in New York City, and the author of Capital City, Gentrification and the Real Estate State, and his essays have been published in such venues as N+1, New York Review of Books, and the New York Review of Architecture. And he says other New York reviews are encouraged to reach out to him with story ideas. And finally, Daphne Lundy is an urban planner and policymaker. Previously, she served as a deputy director at the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. She was also a New City Critics Fellow with the Architectural League of New York and Urban Design Forum, and an inaugural Moynihan Public Scholar at the City College of New York. So each of our panelists, to begin, will be presenting for us their sort of vision or case study of a selected sort of object, you might say, of inquiry. This will all become more clear in just a moment. But that might sort of get our sort of collective gears turning and sort of get our conversation in motion around, again, this sort of central, expansive question of what Mamdani's New York might look like. And so we will begin with Sam, and I will pass it off to him to get us started. Thanks so much.
All right. It was an unseasonably warm morning, the kind we used to be thankful for, but now unnerved us. Mayor Mamdani cut the ribbon for his fourth social housing complex built atop a former golf course, shouting "for" alongside the guest of honor, recently inaugurated Senator Ocasio-Cortez. They had to dodge a phalanx of plaid pants protesters raising golf clubs in clenched fist and chanting about golfers' rights, which made for a more colorful scene than the typical array of xenophobes and sectarians who trailed the mayor's every move. Today was a day for celebration, Mayor Mamdani intoned, as hundreds of thousands more New Yorkers could soon live the dream of permanently affordable, democratically controlled housing, designed not only to shelter, but to extend communal luxury to the masses. We build today on the long legacy of worker-owned social housing in New York City, he joyfully intoned through an unbending smile. From the amalgamated houses in the Bronx to Rochdale Village in Queens, we once built palaces to shared equity and collective leisure. For far too long, our leaders pretended we could never do it again. Today, we proved them wrong. On day one of his administration, Mayor Mamdani tasked his friend and erstwhile rival, the former controller, with blending their two campaigns' housing plans and identifying sites for new social housing production. Plenty of work went into converting the city's existing for-profit rental housing into limited equity cooperatives and public rentals. As the 4-year rent freeze set in, more and more landlords exited the industry, creating first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of opportunities to turn housing from antisocial to social. When residents of Stuyvesant Town redubbed their home Schumpeter Town in celebration of their ex-landlord's creative destruction, we knew we had crossed a Rubicon. But exciting as these conversions were, the city craves something fresh, a new architecture of social housing that would convey the message that New Yorkers could not only remake the social relations of our existing homes, but could build bold new homes for the many. Lander returned to his campaign's idea of converting 4 of the city's 12 public golf courses into the next generation of cooperative developments, building out a new archipelago of social democracy without displacing a single site tenant. Mayor Mamdani had a thing for Electchester, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers' 1949 complex of 2,500 cooperative homes in eastern Queens. It wasn't the best of the bunch, but it was built on a former golf course, and its name exudes pride in the craft of the union that built it. If we could have an Electchester, why not an Adjunct Chester? And so the mayor turned to CUNY's Professional Staff Congress and the United Auto Workers, the two unions representing the bulk of the city's adjunct professoriate, and set about imagining a housing complex designed for their needs. It would feature not only generous housing units, but a communal library and fast and free cooperative buses that shuttled workers, residents between Adjunct Chester and the city's various college campuses. Building on the success of Adjunct Chester, Mamdani's social housing squad turned their eyes to the city's food service workers. Food Chester, or Chipotle Chester, as residents jokingly dubbed it, was specifically designed to socialize social reproduction, offering communal kitchens and dining areas for strung-out workers who, after long days on their feet in kitchens, couldn't stand the idea of returning home only to cook another meal. Now they were on a roll, building on the legacy of 1199 Plaza, the beautifully brutalist row of East Harlem waterfront buildings envisioned by the city's healthcare workers union. Schwitzchester offered the city's army of medical workers a housing cum health spa with more saunas than the Finns could dream of. The fourth project was a victory leap and would be the grandest of them all. Turning away from the Elect Chester theme, Mamdani's social housing squad aimed to conjure the most ambitious feat of the mid-century union housing movement, Co-op City. But if Co-op City boasted over 15,000 cooperatively owned affordable apartments, their co-op world would boast twice that, over 30,000 cooperative homes across an array of buildings named after leaders in the tenant movement. Winsome Penderhoff was the first to rise, followed by Mike McKeeville and too many more to mention. The day of the ribbon cutting, an entire new city within the city, comprehensive in its scope with schools, hospitals, and transit, interspersed with housing, reflected the new yet also old spirit of the city. When the mayor and the senator, hands clamped upon hands, cut that ribbon with a pair of comically large and conspicuously red scissors, they proved once and for all that New York's reign of real estate had finally come to a close.
It's on? Okay. Okay, we were asked to think of objects or mini case studies to draw on the past and think about possible futures for radically seeing, learning, and remaking New York under Mayor Mamdani and all of that public housing, social housing. And I'm focusing on the Detroit Geographical Expedition and Institute, which was a project of radical geography in, yes, Detroit, between 1968 and 72. It was a collaboration between Wayne State geographers, mostly graduate students, but led by a professor, Bill Bungie, who was a giant white person with rage, class rage, all kinds of rage, but a desire to change the world. He brought about a project with students from Wayne State and collaborated with kids and other people in the community. And one of those people was Gwendolyn Warren, who was a high school leaver and a radical who was one of the founders of an organization called the Infernals. And I just spoke with her actually yesterday, and I said, "You're the eternal infernal." So they were radical organizers about schools, about the neighborhood, and met up with Bungie and the students to form what they called the Detroit Geographical Expedition. The idea of an expedition with all its baggage was still radically focused on a single neighborhood in Detroit, Fitzgerald, in order to tell the story of what we now call racial capitalism. The research direction was often spurred by Gwendolyn in association with some of the students and many in the neighborhood, mostly young people. As she argued in one of their occasional publications, geographers have explored everything except where people live. And the DGE was working with people, actually trying to make sense of the world they lived in. Their cartographies were utterly thrilling. Some of them are here. They were totally radical. Like any expedition, good, bad, or ugly, they mapped the world they found around them. But given the young people's radical orientation and life experience in the neighborhood, these were not explorers from afar. As Gwendolyn memorably said to me in a filmed interview, we were their Sacagawea. They mapped things they knew in their bones. Among the things they charted were rat bites, rat sightings, dead trees, car accidents involving children. Like many urban renewed neighborhoods, there was a freeway looming right around Fitzgerald. And they mapped capital flows, one of which you see there. They did an archaeology of a school playground, digging up 1 square yard to count and weigh the glass shards and other debris they excavated near the surface. They unearthed 59 pieces of glass and other jagged objects and weighed that 6.5 ounces. Then they extrapolated it out to the size of the schoolyard and noted that that would mean 821,000 pieces of glass weighing 2.8 tons. That's what I call field research. They also documented things like residential sales, how many times people had to relocate in the neighborhood, the sprawl of what we now call food deserts, and the surface that a child touches, the words you see in a neighborhood, the kinds of litter you see and don't see. One of the things Gwendolyn mentioned in one of their field reports was you don't see candy wrappers because the kids are too poor to have candy. So even a bad thing could be a good thing. They mapped machine space and the sort of worn out, hand-me-down school supplies that children received in their split shift public schools. Their weekly readers were weeks out of date. Kind of wouldn't mind that now. We know we were still alive. They produced field notes, 4 field notes, documenting their research and practice. And Bunge produced an inspired and slightly crazy chronicle of the project called Fitzgerald, Geography of a Revolution. I obviously could go on and on about this, but I'm describing this project of radical geography to suggest and inspire the possibilities of doing all of this around New York, with kids in school, after school, with neighborhood groups, with tenant organizations, including quite little kids who can document the world they see around them in order to change it. But I want to note the amazing institute part of the Detroit Geographical Expedition and Institute, because that was a radical project that can and we can find ways to replicate in Mamdani's New York, even before Adjunct City is built. Maybe we'll build it. But as part of the project, and this part was spurred entirely by the young people, they demanded access to higher education. And for a couple of years, they got that through Michigan State University and Wayne State. No fewer than 450 students enrolled in classes without tuition, taught by faculty who tithed their time, often to pay for this tuition for the students. The curriculum was set by students in collaboration with their teachers and the community, and they used a case study method for teaching and learning, a lot of which is now enshrined as participatory action research. One of the case studies mapped out a plan for school desegregation and was published in their field notes too. That was drawn on by then State Senator and future Detroit Mayor Coleman Young to work out plans for school redistricting. The whole institute part was exuberantly, radically, and successful in getting kids without access to higher education, many of them school leavers, most of them Black, into the state's universities. Many of them continued to get degrees, including graduate degrees. It was modeled on university extension programs for land-grant institutions that reach out to rural kids. But of course, when it was directed at non-white city kids and organized in such a radical way, Michigan State shut it down after a couple of years. There's lots more to be said about this, but for now I want to emphasize what they called an experimental community college is something we can do in and through CUNY. Many of my colleagues and the colleagues and my collaborators in the community have expressed a desire to get college credit for some of the things they do. And CUNY, even CUNY, has been resistant to offering credit to community activists. My colleagues and I are in a position to tithe our time to create a free people's university. We've got the space, we've got the time, we've got the energy, and if not in Mamdani's New York, when? Thanks.
So I wanted to start with some poetry because, shout out to the poetry heads, because in my ongoing quest to find writing and media about love in cities, I stumbled upon this collection from author Court Holden. And he was new to me. I was not aware of his game, but he was he had a very long and storied career. He worked for the WPA, he worked with Frank Lloyd Wright on the Guggenheim. And I think part of what was interesting is that, to me, is that he comes out with this book at the age of 75. And so even in this, the course of his career, he's thinking about architecture, he's thinking about economics, and he reaches a moment where he thinks or he believes that poetry might be a conduit for talking about otherwise dry or hard to understand civics information. If you could go to the next slide. I don't know how I feel about the quality of his poems, I will say that. But I like the fact that he was interested in new mediums of civics. And when I think about the Mamdani campaign, I think part of the sort of parallel I see is this interest in using more creative means to talk about things that might be dry, whether it's zoning or public hearings or infrastructure or what have you. So if you go to the next slide, I sort of zoomed in on this poem, Amenities Destroyed, and really struck by the language in this, and I kind of zoomed in on the last two sentences of the poem. So more than the park, there's need for space arranged so human intercourse can be exchanged. And I think part of what he's calling out in this poem is his belief that development is making us turn inward. There are fewer spaces for people to interact informally. This kind of alludes to what we talk about now when we talk about the dormification of the city. And so this was sort of a way to think about what are those in-between spaces, what are those other moments where people can organize and have that sort of relationship. And so that got me thinking about benches. These are two benches in my neighborhood. The bench on the left is some creative adaptive reuse of some barricades, and so now if you're waiting for the B41, you have a place to wait for the B41. And the bench, the seating on the right is along Prospect Park. And it always sticks out to me because of the color, because there isn't any arm rails, and so it's one of the few places you could actually probably sit and lay down. And I started to sort of think about these sort of tactical seats in the ecosystem of other seats in the city. And so, you can look around any street or block in the city, it'll take you all the way back to the World's Fair, it'll take you to bids and parklets. And as a city, we have this sort of ecosystem of different forms of people lingering in public space. But it seems like New York City and places like it can't seem to decide whether or not we want people to be comfortable in public space. And so I think over the past few years, you've seen this sort of shrinkage or slimming down of places where someone might be able to wait for the bus, or someone might be able to change a diaper, which is something that came up on our conversation. And so there becomes this challenge where space is limited, the types of spaces that people have to linger are slimming down or being slimmed down. So what becomes of these moments of uncoordinated or organic connections? The type of thing that's really helpful for organizing, building solidarity, all of the things that I think Mamdani's campaign has also alluded to. And this gesture feels very counterintuitive because if we look at the breadth of research and writing about benches, what we know is that even before the pandemic, even before initiatives like Thrive NYC, there's this understanding that when you have benches and places for people to sit down and maybe interact with a stranger, that is a moment of forming understanding or forming connectivity or forming relationships that may not otherwise exist. And part of why this is so important is because over the past probably 5+ years, we've seen a lot of the public and free places of sitting and places of respite become harder to access. So that includes everything from library budgets being cut to there not being parks people to maintain the benches or maintain the open spaces. And this is a particular, I think, challenge for all New Yorkers, but it's specifically a challenge for young New Yorkers. When we think about if you go to the next slide, if you think about the spaces that young New Yorkers are hanging out in, specifically teenagers, those spaces are becoming more and more limited. And if you go to a lot of places in the city, whether it's Atlantic Mall or other spaces like it, what you'll find is that there are very specific rules around when and how teenagers are allowed to be in public space. So this is a sign from Target, McDonald's, something that was new to me, but that comes up with a lot of my friends who have tweens, is that the Starbucks has become sort of like the tween hangout spot. And so when there were sort of notification of a lot of Starbucks chains being shut down, it also sort of signaled this end of a space that felt comfortable for tweens and teenagers. And so part of why I thought about teenagers specifically is because I reflected on my own teenageness in New York City. If you were not in Brooklyn in the 2000s, this front image of Brooklyn Museum might seem new or unexpected. But in the early 2000s, the Brooklyn Museum installed this sort of pavilion and stoop seating that we're familiar with today. I happened to be a teenager literally around the corner from the Brooklyn Museum when this happened. And as a teenager that had little to no money and lived in a small apartment, having a stoop and a space to sit for free was really incredible and formidable, and it was a place you felt like you could be yourself. And so I guess the last thing I'll say is that if we consider that all types of public space are negotiations with other people, but also with infrastructure, the street sign, the curb cut, the fire hydrant, all of the things that make it hard to design things in space, what does that mean, or what sort of expectations should we be putting on the humble bench if we know how hard it is to get that humble bench there to begin with? And I think about, if you go to the last slide, the potential that humble benches could have when it comes to other systems that we care about, whether it's climate resiliency, whether it's thinking about the digital divide, but really trying to take advantage of, I think, these small moments of civic connectivity to tap into the larger and I think broader ambitions that we also have for the city. So that's it.
Maybe I should click. I have too many slides, sorry. Just forward? Yeah. This one, okay, great. I'm gonna click myself, okay. My object is swimming pools. Maybe it would have been more appealing 2 weeks ago, but stick with it and I might still make a case for it. So every summer, a new set of New Yorkers or new New Yorkers or New Yorkers newly unafraid of public things seems to discover the city's public pools. This incredible, delightful municipal resource that we have for barely over 2 months of the year. The most charismatic we owe to Mayor LaGuardia, right? Armed with lots of WPA money and his can-do Parks Commissioner, Robert Moses. In 1936, the city opened 11 monumental municipal pools across all 5 boroughs, right? Offering this new space for mass leisure and luxury, or at least to have time to luxuriate in public, for recreation, for education, things like swimming classes. This one is Betsy Head Pool in Brownsville. It's going to be awkward. Okay. Then we have in the 60s and early 70s, Mayor John Lindsay builds a big second round of smaller pools, more prosaic, more distributed, and redistributed across the city. It's a moment of partially analogous socio-political turmoil, diminishing urban resources, a threat of popular rebellion, and the mayor can't end poverty or transcend racism in his post, but he can build a pool by Morris Lapidus in Bed-Stuy. So Morris Lapidus, better known for Miami Beach resort architecture, offering this just incredible swimscape open to all. So pools are good, swimming is nice, it gets really hot in summer. Pundits have been pointing out a lot lately, pools have historically posed a test of our ability to coexist with others. They're a good place for us to lay bare our shared and half-naked humanity. They offer a space of public luxury, of pool party progressivism, of social infrastructure, but cooler and hotter than libraries. All good things, and I think in the spirit of equity, justice, and affordability, but also especially joy and an idea that life in the city is something that can bring pleasure and joy to everybody who lives in it. So, you know, as such, oh, there's another one, the Kosciuszko pool. So pools as such are a strong symbol of our commitment to life in common. They also keep us safe from sharks, so there's another climate adaptation advantage. But the state of the pools and our shared pools is not great. So this image, some may recall from Sao Paulo from 2004. Not sharing your swimming pools is a bad social indicator, and we have a lot of that in New York as well, and it's increasing. So I think Daphne already talked a little bit about, you know, our thirst for connection, but also water recreation is something in the last few years that has not gone unnoticed by the growing wellness industry, which is not just growing in market share, but has a really big urban footprint. So on the left are some sort of ominous Epstein-esque Tribeca basement baths. Now have all kinds of successors, I think, in Bushwick private club rooftop baths. On the right is a rendering from Toronto, which kicked out Sidewalk Labs only to get stuck with this kind of creepy wellness company's pay-to-play theme park on the waterfront. So the folks who brought us the High Line and a number of other plans are now sort of bringing these large pay-to-play wellness spaces to Toronto, to DC, to Dallas, and I think they would hope here too. Right, we also have our own very special New York public-private pools that we've been innovating on, and in fact have put municipal money into this proof of concept to stake out a tiny portion of the East River for purified enjoyment. Still not much progress there. So, you know, the rather modest question of how a Mamdani mayoralty could reverse this trend or possibly usher in a third age of public pools for the city, I think it's a very modest and extremely utopian proposal that points to the both high difficulty and very simple stakes. You know, what if our public pools had a longer season, had longer hours, there were more jobs for lifeguards, there were more swimming classes, there were summer camp. So all the things that we already have and a bit more. Okay, and even better, because I know we were prompted and haven't done well on the sort of radical brutalist architecture front, with at least a nod to plug-in inflatable architectural utopianism past. What if we could take a little bit of inspiration from these very modest and I think lovely proposals by an architect, Karolina Sheshek, who, for an architect today in the city to say, I'm not even going to suggest that we build new pools, but what if we could just adapt the ones that we have to year-round use? My favorite proposal, and again, lots of overlap, is for this plug-in public sauna, right, which again has mental health benefits, year-round use benefits. I think plugs into the sort of Mamdani campaign's proposals of a vision that's Scandinavian but brown. And so, I think it's not much to ask, and yet also extremely much to ask. So, architectural historian, not a policy person. I don't know how much it would cost, but I understand it's too much. But what if we paid for it through a municipal resort fee? The discourse, I think, along all of these years of the urban locus of fun and the idea of a city as a playground and who that's for have been so critical, I think, to modern imaginations of the city in the sort of struggle against an enclavization of all the fun. Maybe we can tax amenity buildings to make the city amenable for all of us. Maybe mandatory inclusionary swimming. There are lots of different variations on this that could fund the pools. There you go.
Wow, great, thank you. Words fail me. This is just, this has been so wonderful. So we're going to spend the next 20, 30 minutes or so in sort of open discussion, and Mark and I will pose some very friendly, open-ended questions to our panelists, and thank you again for these dazzling contributions. And I should have said at the start that, so part of our brief for our speakers here was to really kind of, give space to sort of, take flight, toward, as Mariana just mentioned, sort of utopian horizons, radical possibilities, imagining spaces, places, resources, built environments that don't exist or don't yet exist in their sort of most radical form, and to really kind of not hold back, and I think you haven't, which is great. At the same time, of course, we in sort of soaring so high, we don't want to kind of lose sight of the kind of political facts on the ground. So we might vary our altitude somewhat. I think it's time to block that metaphor, but. I think so in this next sort of segment, we want to, sort of as mentioned earlier, I think try to begin thinking about, again, some of these sort of, usable pasts and working models, and not to lose sight of these sort of, utopian possibilities, but also to put these in sort of in conversation with, again, the kind of practical realities, obstacles, obstructions that all of these projects face, but how we can kind of think through and around those things together. So I think, just to start us off, and Mark will have other questions, and everyone's thoughts and questions are welcome. I think this is sort of partly, I guess, to begin with, directed to Sam, but very much for our collective thinking. I think that in your wonderful vision of Adjunct Chester and Chipotle Chester, and what was it, Schumpeter Town? How could I forget? You acknowledge that we've been sort of, I think fed or sold this narrative, which is often sort of sadly true, that kind of municipal projects, whether they're directly sort of funded by the city or by unions or nonprofits, that kind of city building, sort of radically kind of communal and affordable developments like this, cooperative developments, are simply not possible anymore, and they certainly don't seem to get built on this scale anymore. more. And so I think just to sort of start us and orient us, just to begin with a very basic question, which is why is that, or why does it feel that way? Also, I think maybe what are the sort of interests, at stake in sort of making it feel that way, and again, how do we begin to sort of transcend this kind of hegemonic narrative that projects like this are not feasible. So I think we can just start things there.
Sure, that's a really big one. Nothing that I talked about is possible. So just to get that out. And there's good reasons for that. It's not because nobody wants to do it. The union stopped building co-ops for a number of reasons. Hyperinflation was one, decline of federal subsidies was another, lack of available land. So for a while, they were just tearing down working class people's housing to build other working class people's housing, and that became rightly seen as a terrible way to do things. So they stopped doing that, but then they started building on these other sites, like the golf courses. And Rochdale Village was built on a former racetrack, Co-op City, a former amusement park. But there's only so many of those that you're going to find. And Co-op City was like also swampland. It was sinking immediately. It was not the best place for that. It was the place they could get. But then, more profoundly than even any of that, unions were not only using their pension dollars to build workers' paradises, they were also teaming up with the mafia to build casino boondoggles and things like that. And there were cooperative schemes that were great, where they would collect workers' pension money in advance, build the co-op, and then you could move into it. But there were also Ponzi schemes that were stealing people's money, claiming that they would build them a co-op and then never doing it. So two sets of laws went into effect. One said, you can't collect the money before you build the co-op. So now they would have to be financed all up front with something other than the workers' money of the people who are going to move in. Second, the federal government says union pension funds have to be basically invested like corporate investors would. You have to give them to a third party to invest, and they have to seek maximum returns. No more of this social good stuff, and no more of this mafia dealing stuff either. So with all that off the table, it wasn't exactly easy to continue this project, and so it ended. The last one that got built, well, Co-op City was the last one that got finished by a union developer. 1199 Plaza was started by a union developer, but not finished. Starrett City was supposed to be the last big cooperative project, ended up in the Trump family portfolio. So that's the other big thing that changed, is this switch to a real estate-driven economy in New York City, away from a kind of mixed manufacturing plus a bunch of other stuff that included real estate economy. And then once real estate, finance, insurance is the main driver of the economy, then the land prices start to soar, and that's the way that the city pays for everything. All the good stuff and all the bad stuff. The cops and the schools is by property value taxing. So here we are now. Mayor Mamdani is about to win, I'm very confident, but he's going to be presiding over a city that's structurally dependent on ever-rising property values. And it's going to take more than one mayor to turn that around. But, excited to try.
It's good to have we're in the trough. No, it's good. No. It was very persuasive pitch. I think one of the elements that I think has sort of like pleasurably come to the surface from everyone is a sense of both a kind of like a sense of playfulness on the level of of one's own kind of urban invention, but also of sort of approach to space, and a kind of expansion of possible terrain. And I guess I'm thinking about different mayors and their geographies. When I think of Mayor Adams, what are the kind of the critical parts of New York that feel sort of most Adamsian. I think of the back room at Zero Bond. I think of New Jersey, and I think of Albania. Yes, and Azerbaijan. Well, peace in our time, yeah. And but but already before he's been elected, I think that Mamdani's kind of he's certainly there's a clear and articulated, and I mean to my I suppose amateur urban explorer's heart, very sort of felicitous expansion of the geography. So yeah, sort of less Zero Bond and more bodega. Less New Jersey and more, walking from Inwood to Battery Park, and a general sense of, of a political campaign and a sort of political approach that really reflects the city as it's lived and experienced and as it is, as we all know it. I guess I'm just curious about, just very sort of, like kind of tentative or sort of unprofessional observations about what, just like what already feels, through this campaign, what parts of the city, what parts of city life feel more acknowledged, feel more attended to, and what can we hope for? Maybe I'll start with Daphne because she's next to me, but of course I'd love to hear from everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to this theme of civics and civically minded New Yorkers, and I think he's been able to get people excited about living here and existing in here and the possibility of what this place could be. And it feels like such a obvious thing, but we've had a pretty long tenure of people who are elected to serve and run the city having all of this antagonism about the city, and that is, I think that does not inspire coalition building, that does not inspire excitement, that does not inspire people wanting to do the hard work of getting to different sorts of visions. And I go back to his, he did it wasn't a raffle, it was a scavenger hunt. And what was so funny to me is how a lot of the other candidates basically called it corny, this idea of people joyfully looking for puzzles and facts and information about the city. But that kind of orientation towards learning more about place and wanting to talk to people about place, I think that's what he's done really well. And I think that probably ties to how effective he is at talking to young people. But I think more broadly, he's just getting people excited about New York City and the history and like what could be. And that in and of itself feels so special, and I think unlike what we've seen in a while.
I mean, maybe just to, or not. Just to follow on that, I mean, I think, and to maybe counteract some of the gloom, but be small thinking. Like, I think the discursive shift is so important, right? I think just using another language and subjects to talk about the city, and I think one of the ones I've been thinking about, maybe especially today, is not in a direct way, but I think reframing the idea of city life from the management and enjoyment of choice, which has been sort of the reigning logic since, at least 2001, right? And sort of speaking to most of us don't choose, to come or go or live here or somewhere else. And I think just a focus on, a city as a place where people are, as opposed to, consumer or tax bracket choice, as part of a larger, again, just conception of what the city is a really powerful shift, just in terms of thinking and talking, and what comes from that is second.
Yeah. Another arena is about education and schools and universal pre-K and 3K, and he's obviously struggling with not having the selective exams and the pushback on that, and the whole question that it brings up, and this could be the utopian utopia, is why can't we have a notion of social childhood where every child has a good school to go to? There was and I know we can all romanticize the mid-20th century for being better than it was, but there was a sense that every kid's education mattered. And now people opt out of shitty schools, and the exam structure enables that, and the different preparation of children for that is so from the get-go uneven. And how to rebalance that is one of the big questions that I know he's grappling with, but he's going to need a lot of help from teachers and parents and kids who can really think about how to make schools more better. I never took English.
I think there are specific geographies that we could attach to Mamdani and think about where he did best and votes or whatever, but I think his campaign was kind of structured against that in a way, because it was more about publics. It was about the bus riders, the parents of children, the rent-stabilized tenants. And because I'm a housing person, tenant person, like the 4-year rent freeze is like a really exciting and utterly irresponsible demand that was like hugely, and like the irresponsibleness of is part of what's exciting about it. And I can I talked about this when we were planning this, that I can think back to like all my neighbors and all my rent stabilized apartments, and just to think that we know that we can stay there for 4 years without the rent going up is a kind of stability that essentially only homeowners with a 30-year fixed mortgage can have. And democratizing that, again, it's going to be so hard to maintain. We're going to do a lot of work to make it work, but there's a freedom in that I think is not really geographically bound, and that's part of what's exciting about it.
Great, yeah, thank you all. I think that this is sort of building on some of these points, and I think inspired most immediately by Mariana's presentation, but I think it can be sort of extended in many directions. Mariana, you spoke about at the end of your presentation about it was what was it, amenity fee or the resort fee? Right, a municipal resort fee, and again, right away you come up against sort of political obstacles. It's like the city can't sort of impose its own taxes, and the state is involved, et cetera. But I think sort of holding that in mind, but also setting it aside, I think this just it reminds me a bit of the so-called pied-à-terre tax, the sort of tax on second and third and fourth homes. These luxury homes, largely unoccupied. In New York, that has been around in the state legislature for some time and yet to pass. And I remember, I think it was in 2021, maybe most memorably, there was sort of a discussion on the left broadly that one reason that the tax had failed was because most people don't know what the hell a pied-à-terre is, and that partly because the law was so poorly nicknamed, it failed to gain traction. And I think there's some truth in that. I think that the more sort of materialist explanation would be that the real estate lobby killed the bill. But I think sort of holding on to that kind of thought, I think sort of reframing, reorienting these kinds of redistributive proposals around these sort of everyday public goods, or what can be public goods, these sort of sites of sociality, and I think one really suggestive word that Daphne used was lingering. Benches as a place to linger, which is an activity that's it can be sort of disparaged or even criminalized. Lingering becomes loitering, right? But I think there's this sort of zone or domain of sort of not kind of commercially purposeful, but of course humanly meaningful activity for which there's sort of smaller and smaller space in the city. So I guess sort of finally to sort of bring these things together. And this is, once again, a big question, but I guess I'm curious for any kind of sort of initial thoughts about that kind of move, and especially, and this is also sort of taking up some of Mark's points, taking up that sense of play and fun, but also, again, these sort of practices of lingering and sort of social life, outside of work, outside of sort of making money, whether for yourself or for others, how we can sort of mobilize these sort of images of play and fun and leisure towards sort of public goods, public spaces, in a way that does this sort of serious political work of sort of again orienting our rhetoric toward the sort of, again, redistribution and opening up of space. And so I don't know if this question quite cohered, but hopefully there are sort of threads to be pulled at. And so I think anyone who wants to jump in, jump into the muddy waters of the pool that I've just created with this question, please go right ahead.
Maybe to buy us some time to think about some answers, I guess, maybe my question to you would be, is there a need to be very strategic about that, or hasn't also the campaign maybe shown that people respond to the possibility of good things that you can enjoy and make your life better? Like, I don't think it's a very hard sell. I think, maybe coming back to the sort of geography question, right? It's a shift of, some of this is really what the city's been selling for the last 30 years, right? But for export, for tourists, for pied-à-terres. So I'm not really sure what I'm saying other than asking, I don't know, like, is that a hard sell? Is that the question?
It's never hard to sell play. It's hard to get the time or the space for it, and to have good play spaces and parks that are open, that encourage and enable play at all different times of day. Also, all of the schoolyards that are unimproved and locked when schools are closed. There's so many spaces available that are unavailable. But one of the things that I think about in my work is about what Marx called disposable time. And if there's disposable time, which is playtime, time to create, time to write sonnets, perhaps better than those, time to swim, and do all kinds of things, it requires the time, which means a better wage. So if people don't have to work 5 jobs and actually have a living wage, they don't have to work as hard. There's, and I don't want to be the one who says AI is coming and going to kill all of us, but I said it. And when it does, we can all play. And we need the space to play, and we need the resources to play. But that, we really have 19th century, early 20th century work hours and work regulations. And we really could do what we do with a lot less time if people were paid full-time for 25 hours a week. And then they would be able to swim. I can tell you one.
No, I just want to add, right, that play is also jobs, right? You can't swim all day if no one is supervising.
I've had some time. I'm getting to it. Something I was thinking about that's kind of tied to play is when, it's a question I go back to often, is when does somebody interact with government for the first time? And I think, I ask myself that question because I think on the federal level, there is this, if you're not a bureaucrat, a former bureaucrat, appreciative bureaucrats, there's a moment that's happening on the federal level where people are now noticing the absence of government in terms of services, in terms of resources, in terms of what government provides. And I think that part of what Mamdani's campaign is doing is reminding us that governments can provide good things. Like governments can provide things that fundamentally change your quality of life. And it could be something as dramatic as your stability in your housing. It could be something as simple as a scavenger hunt where you learn about the history of a pool or the history of a civic space. It could be so many other things that we touch and are actually government, but we don't think about it in that way. And I think for a lot of people, their first sort of engagement with government is probably in a school, it's probably in a library. If you're somebody that receives any sort of social service, it's probably at an HRA office. And so if these are the moments of contact, how do we ensure that people, A, have dignity through those moments, but also that they're in beautiful spaces that might, support joyfulness or support play? So there's something about this moment of, like realizing that government can do things that drastically help people's lives or stabilize people's lives in some way. I think that's what's coming to mind, in this current moment.
One thing that I'm thinking about is that we have such an intensive housing crisis that it's hard to prioritize space for other things than housing, including in housing developments. And yet some of the things that we love the most about some of those like large-scale social housing cooperatives that I was talking about before is the stuff that isn't the housing. It's the fact that there was a ballroom or that there was, playgrounds and basketball courts and stuff like that. And so holding on to some of that as, it's good. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm thinking about, and this is kind of a question for you, Mariana, is a fun city. Right, you wrote a book about Lindsay's New York. Like, that's mostly remembered as not effective. Like, it's a joke now. I don't know if at the time it was a real thing, but like, you can't try too hard at making the city fun. Like, if Mamdani comes out and is like, "I'm gonna make the city fun again," I don't think MAFA is gonna take off as a movement. But I think like if you just do it, it might actually happen. But maybe I don't know. Do you have anything to say about Fun City?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound cool, right, if you put it that way. But I think, I don't know, kind of like a really embarrassing Lindsay apologist. Like, I think, like the Fun City thing got turned around on him, right, in a way that I think came from that perspective of how dare you, in a way, propose that fun is something that is under the remit of the mayor or the city when we have a transit strike, we have, leader sanitation, right? All of these things, right? That it's all serious, we can't have anything, and so it's a joke, to suggest that fun is part of the equation. So, I mean, it's a little bit along the lines of, well, we have to use all the space for housing, so we can't have any basketball courts. I don't know, I think that's a false choice. And I mean, I will say, again, going back to usable past, right, some of what that meant was a lot of democratization of culture, of funding for culture, at least for a little while there was some money, some municipal largesse when it came to events that folks could participate in and enjoy that didn't cost money. So that's just like my defense of Lindsay, but I think, to laugh at that, I think, is to sort of suggest that, like, you can't have both, and the whole point is you can.
Yeah, I think yeah we reached a good trough with AI taking our jobs, but actually we kind of blew past that too quickly. So I'll just like suggest another trough in response to Lindsay, but then kind of maybe try to emerge from it. You know, it seems likely that yeah, where the Fun City thing feels haunting is in anticipation of you know, a recessionary environment in the coming months and years, and you know, the ongoing and only strengthening retrenchment of federal funding across all sectors, but you know, housing, social services, like the things that New York and other cities already strain to maintain. And then, of course, you know, some imminent invasion by ICE. I mean, you know, more stronger and more robust than has already happened in New York, along the lines of what's happening in Chicago and in DC and in LA this summer, which, yeah, that's not fun. And you know, and I think, you know, there is this kind of you know, to really bring it down before I reemerge, you know, there is a kind of haunting specter of the you know, of the kind of leftist or socialist in power who, you know, begins to govern just as things kind of like collapse really beyond their control, and of course they're blamed for everything. Maybe it won't happen. But having said that, I guess something I am interested in this conversation is, you know, just because I think it's even though it's a conversation about Mamdani's New York, I am kind of also interested in decentering it a little bit. Some of what we're talking about, I mean, Mariana, of course, you're right that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, the city has been selling in one way or another for export, you know, to people in you know, Europe that one encounters wearing Brooklyn T-shirts. That was so crazy the first time I saw that. But also it's been instantiating it too. You know, a lot of the stuff that we like about bike infrastructure in New York has, of course, unfolded over, you know, a number of like unlikable mayoral administrations in some ways. Public space in New York, I feel like it, you know, grew by leaps and bounds under Bloomberg in these like gross but highly effective ways. And I guess I'm just like, I'm curious about what I'm not going to spoil a forthcoming piece by Sam Stein in the next issue of N+1, so you got to subscribe for that. I'll get to that later too. But I guess I'm curious a little bit about kind of your different conceptions of, you know, what one might call the kind of perennial city or the perennial bureaucracy that that sort of like manages to effectuate certain kinds of good things even when leadership is out clubbing or worse. And also, you know, I don't know, maybe like an interesting kind of, you know, recent or not so recent initiative or two that actually we can point to and say, well, that, you know, that happened like under not a socialist, so maybe when there's a socialist, we can actually dream bigger. I don't know, maybe I'll just point to Sam first, but it can be anyone.
Right. So, yeah, so I have a piece in the next N+1 about the last 4 years and making sense of the Eric Adams administration. And as a preview, just a preview, one of the things that I talk about is that as bad as things got at the top and as bad as a few very specific things got for the city as a whole, most things continued as they were. The city didn't actually fall apart, and most of the city services didn't fall apart. They got worse for the most part, and then actually some things got better. It's very chaotic. And one of the reasons for that is that like most of the same people work the jobs, whoever the mayor is, and some of them are really excited about a new mayor with a new vision, and others roll their eyes and keep doing what they were doing before. And so like the positive side of this is a bad guy at the top doesn't bring down the whole army of municipal workers. That was the good side. The bad side is a good guy at the top doesn't necessarily change everything, because there's an army of municipal workers. They're the same people who have been working for every administration. And it's not to say that they're like bad because they're not turning everything around. It's like, it's a job like any other. If it was my job and there was a new boss and he was like, I'm gonna do things differently now, you know, you roll your eyes and get back to work. So there's that. And then in terms of like a good thing, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I can point to and say, wow, that was actually a good thing, and Eric Adams can't get out of his own way of making it not work, is garbage containerization and composting. That's life-changing thing for every single New Yorker. It's a huge beginning of an accomplishment. He could have accomplished a lot more. But the fact that like in a few years, we're not all gonna be walking down streets with piles of leaking garbage everywhere, and that we're gonna compost, well, or if not compost, at least like put our food in a place where it's going to rot better. It's great. It's a really big deal, and it affects literally everyone. And this idiot can't take his own win because like every time he stops putting, enforcing the composting rules, and he rolls it out and then he rolls it back, and then he's got this rat czar, and then the rat czar is gone. But like he actually did the thing. So yeah, I think that's my example of a thing that even Eric Adams could have accomplished that, and hopefully Mamdani will do a lot more.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a direct way to answer it, but I guess to go back to the bureaucracy of it all. New York City employs 300,000 people. Like it usually is around 300,000 people. That is like the size of Cincinnati. That's bigger than Buffalo. And I think to your point, depending on who is at the very top of that, you have 300,000 people at your disposal that can actually shift things, that could introduce new programs, that can, actually make meaningful change to people's lives. And I think a lot of that will be dictated by, who are the commissioners, who are the people that are put in place. And it's unfortunately going to be dictated by a budget situation that's really challenging and will continue to be challenging. But I guess I'd bring up the scale, because that's something that is so unique, and it is such a resource that a lot of places don't have. And during the pandemic, a lot of things did not work, but a lot of things worked in part because there was that force of people. At that point, no matter what job you had, it did not matter. You were just kind of deployed to do emergency response stuff. Like I worked on vaccine lines. I checked people in for vaccines. I had a friend who worked for the food czar. People were doing air conditioning programs. And all of that was possible because we had the force of a small Midwestern city. And so I think part of what I'm excited to see is like, how do we mobilize that through the lens of what Mamdani's campaign has really been focused on, and how does that also tie back to the quality of life piece that I think he's spoken about in a way that I haven't really heard from a lot of politicians. Just like, what makes your life demonstrably easier to be? And it's not for somebody that's new or somebody that's gonna come in. It's not this marketing thing. It's just like, if you live here, what are the things that would make it easier for you to live here? And then do all the other things that you can think about when you're not at work or, at school. So I think that's part of the excitement I have. Like, what does he do with all that power? What does he do with the scale of power that he has in a place like New York City?
Only that we see that at the federal level, people are losing their jobs at the whim of a president. So, I'm hoping that Mamdani keeps the 300,000 people. Obviously, he's not psychotic like some people, but there is a way that things can really be shaken up in good and bad ways. And we're seeing that in terms of people who are civil servants who thought they had job security, who rolled their eyes and said, okay, we'll do what we do. And they're not allowed to do what they do. So, but AI will replace the president.
There's a lot more to talk about. I really wanted to sort of propose my theory that for a sort of Detroit program style 2, we would get the children of New York to map dog shit and sort of just impose very punitive taxation rates accordingly. This is my big thank you. Yeah, we're gonna do it. It's part of it's my two-pronged platform, that and long car horn use. But I think we should open it up to questions so that we have time to hear from you all and also to hang out in this space. So Katie's got the mic. Yeah, do you want to just go ahead?
So actually, what you just said sort of gets to what I've been thinking about throughout this. Well, when you talk about dog shit, which is that a lot of spaces in New York are very nice, and then a handful of people can make them not so nice places. And I wonder how that sort of fits into what you've been talking about, because you've been talking about lots of shared spaces. For instance, the new pool in Harlem is really nice, in part because it's very well staffed, and any sort of misbehavior is clamped down upon, so it's a nice shared space. And you know, we can all think about play spaces in the city that are made less nice by the fact that there are people who maybe blast music in a park or, you know, in a library, you know, cause a ruckus or whatever. And I was just sort of wondering, as you talked, what you talked about, how that fits into what your view about how these spaces can develop and evolve.
I mean, my first inclination is to interpret the question as a little bit of like a scarcity question as well, right? Like people making a ruckus in the library immediately brings to mind, well, like where are you supposed to, and maybe where is the place in the library for that? So I don't think, I mean, it seems, maybe I'm being aggressive, like you're saying that we can't have, you know, like public goods because we can't take good care of them. And I guess I don't know that that's the case, right? I mean, as you're saying, like it's a maintenance question and it's also a, you know, supply question. Yeah.
I don't know how to answer this, but what it made me immediately think of was when I was a planning student at Hunter College. I lived in an apartment with my best friend and her then boyfriend and another friend. And my best friend and her boyfriend, I don't know if they still identify this way, but we're anarchists. And they were almost like offended by my pursuit of city planning because they thought it was inherently coercive. And I remember sitting on the stoop one night and talking about that Holly White documentary about the social life of small urban spaces. Not a great figure to me, but like it's a fun film, and it's about privately owned public spaces, and he sets up cameras and he just observes how they're used, and he finds that it's better, for example, if the chairs aren't like nailed into the ground, and that people can actually move them around. And yeah, somebody's going to steal one or two of them, but not that many, and we can live with the fact that somebody's going to steal one or two of them, but and trust people that that's actually going to work out better than having like an architect who says, no, 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 you sit this way and only this way, and a cop who says, if you take that chair, I'm going to arrest you. Anyway, I was talking about this with my anarchist friends, and somehow we got in this scenario of like, what if there's somebody who just takes a chair and throws it into the East River every day, over and over again, every single day? Picks up a chair, and that's his desire, and he throws it in. And their position was, it's fine, we replace the chair every day. And my position was, I don't think we should replace the chair every single day, but maybe we can talk to the guy, maybe we can do something else besides nail the chair to the ground or arrest him. And I still don't know exactly what that is, but I do believe that like we can work this out, that it doesn't have to be either a hyper police state or an architecturally overdetermined space or the worst version of anarchy.
Hi, just thank you all again for a really great talk. I wrote down my question since I'm prone to rambling, which is, I was really struck by the way that all of you sort of talked about how our ways of socializing and also our ways of spending have changed a lot in the 21st century. And I don't know, I've recently moved back to New York after growing up here my whole life, and I guess a sort of worry that I've heard about from my friends who have also grown up here interacting with their new transplant friends is that there can also be sort of a neighbor-averse culture, especially among the younger, more impressionable potential Mamdani voters who are very willing to park and bark about the word community but not really engage in it. And it sort of bristles against the sort of love affair New Yorkers have with nostalgia. And I think that that's something that also really characterizes the Mamdani campaign in another way, is nostalgia. And I see it in sort of this vision of like a potential utopian New York as well, of looking to the past. I mean, where else are we supposed to really look? But I think something that then sort of cuts into this is that there are parts of nostalgia that are great to look at, sort of as what Cindy was talking about, and then there's also parts of, you know, the 20th century that were not so great. And I think, unfortunately, the Democratic establishment has sometimes correctly criticized people like Mamdani or the Democratic Socialists of America for not properly addressing these things beyond a class question, right? So I guess I'm wondering, in your interventions and thinking about like mass construction of social housing, or rethinking even like the park bench, like what does this mean for communities that already have a lot of housing, just not a lot of people occupying it, or communities that have a lot of benches but not a lot of benches with green space, for example, which tend to be Black and brown communities, right? Yeah, I guess, how do you square that round hole?
Wait, sorry, I know, what's the hole?
Or the peg in the hole, rather. You know, we have these sort of utopian solutions in building, but we also have a lot of potential for repurposing in places that unfortunately are not so great to repurpose, like physically or in terms of their beauty or whatever. Essentially, my question is, there's a lot of discussion in this campaign about class, but not a lot of discussion in this campaign about identity as such. And I think those two things cannot be addressed apart. And I think a good criticism of Mamdani is that he hasn't done a great job of addressing those things apart. So I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm curious what panelists think. I would say I don't think that's why the Democratic establishment is criticizing him, I would think. But I don't know, I guess, well, yeah, to me, you know, as the panelist genius, Colin and I are just sitting here, but I feel like there's like a great sense of simultaneity that we're all talking about, and that I would think that any kind of serious urban intervention, I mean, from Mamdani, but also, you know, really from any mayor of New York, I certainly don't see the purpose of this discussion, but also of any kind of like, you know, like emergent political leadership as being, you know, laser focused on one, you know, whatever phenomenon to the exclusion of all others. And I actually think that, you know, I think that even like New York's lesser mayors have, I think, pretty quickly run up against the fact that you just have to like, you have to think about everything all the time. But fortunately, you have 300,000 people who, you know, in the best case, can help you do it. I don't know. That would be my first, but I'm not really being asked. But I guess but so I guess I'm curious what you all think. But then also just to maybe pivot slightly, like, is there? But I think that all of you, I think these are all great examples. I was going to say, like, is there a great example of like a particularly kind of like nice example of simultaneity? But you guys are, I mean, all of these things, like the benches, the pool, like these are all, yeah, I don't know. Does anybody else have anything to say?
I think I'm still trying to understand the question of, I mean, is the heart of the question around, I think there's a piece of this question around community, or what makes it not possible to have community. So when we think about these forms of collectivism or people, coming together, what are the blockages? I think that's part of what I hear in your question. And I guess the second question was about the campaign specifically and identify, I guess, what it's not talking about versus what it is talking about. Is that like a fair? Yeah. Okay, wow, great. Okay, that's great. Okay, so now that I've asked the question to myself, and then I have to think about it. Yeah. This transplant versus native New Yorker divide versus who are you talking to, in your building. I don't know a good fix to that, but time. And I think perhaps time, and I think one of the ways in which it's been hard to make community is tied, like one of the ways it's hard to make community is tied to the fact that for some people there is a transience in how we exist here because of the economics of how we exist here. And so if the sort of utopian or the forward gesture we want to get to is people being able to talk to each other and figure out who they live amongst or who they work amongst or who they move and share a street with. I think part of what makes that possible is spending more than a year or 13 months in a lease that is predatory. And I think to the extent that bigger question of stability in place is solved, that then makes it possible to also have concurrently questions of, moments to actually build community and relationship. But that is a time thing. I don't even know if that's something that's accomplished over the course of a campaign, but it's accomplished over the course of somebody living in a place long enough and feeling some level of lack of stress so they can actually get to know people.
I mean, I'm also just, I think of the Detroit project as a form of, durational understanding of a place too, right? Just like forms of engagement that are not just going to vote, paying your taxes, going to the DMV or whatever, riding the subway, but actually, yeah, just like a sort of deep familiarization that kind of has these effects that are kind of unmeasurable.
And they connected their organizing with other things that were going on in Detroit at the time. The union work, it was all post-uprising, so it was, who just said pivotable? Somebody on TV said pivotable, but I don't even know what I saw, but it was a pivotal time, and there were was organizing. The Panthers and Detroit Geographical Expedition were all working across, not just within that one community, but across issues, and saw that they could deal with something that mattered to one constituency or one community, but mattered across, what you're saying, simultaneity or horizontality, that one of the things they talked about was buses and the inconvenience of being able to live in a neighborhood with poor connection to transportation and have to take 3 different buses to get to work for a poorly paid job. That was not something that the union was talking about, but it mattered to those workers, so that there was, you used the word neighbor, but there was a kind of collective sense of issues across problems, and a recognition that one group, no matter how vibrant and how wonderful, could not deal with everything, but that there was serious connections in the interests of the different organizations, tenants groups, labor unions, Panthers at the time, and the DGEI for that matter, and students, adjuncts.
We'll have one last question, but Colin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. You you wrote a great piece for N+1 over the summer about Mamdani's primary victory, but also about organizing for Mamdani and just the hours, the many hours you put in. And I mean, that just feels like such a direct response to the question of, you know, young New Yorkers, transplant New Yorkers, new New Yorkers, getting to know one another and finding ways to interact with one another. And I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to that experience.
Sure. I mean, I should say that, you know, I was active, have been active in the campaign at a very, you know, modest level, and I want to give due credit to the hundreds and thousands of you know, comrades who are dedicating their entire lives to this campaign. But yeah, I was helping lead some canvases and knock on some doors. And you know, as I mentioned in the short, you know, web essay that I wrote for N+1 about this, you know, I think in the first place, the breadth and universality of Mamdani's platform is remarkable. You know, I've been knocking doors for lefty, you know, candidates in New York off and on for I don't know, 8 or so years now, and you know, this is just by far the easiest pitch to make. You know, it's like make my bus run on time. You know, stop my rent going up. You know, sign me. Where do I sign? So there's that, and that, you know, that sort of already cuts across and brings together so many constituencies, you know, across class and ethnic and racial and linguistic and national backgrounds and identities, you know, however you want to sort of draw those sort of vectors. And I think the campaign in itself, you know, has achieved, you know, I mean, we can sort of tweak and poke at this or that sort of rhetorical choice here and there, but I think the kind of proof is really, you know, in the streets. And in the sort of the voices and faces and votes of the people who have been part of the campaign, you know, and seeing, you know, sort of Bangladeshi, you know, immigrants in Kensington and sort of Chinese community leaders in Flushing and you know, Dominican, you know, store owners in Inwood, all sort of coming together and sort of building the Mamdani coalition in a way that is genuinely sort of multi-ethnic, multi-generational. And sort of founded in, of course, you know, working class solidarity, but also sort of bringing in fractions of sort of, you know, different layers of the working and middle classes. I think is certainly not without precedent in history, but I think in many of our lifetimes, and definitely given the kind of moment of darkness that we're in. I mean, for me, this is it's been remarkable. So that's my little rhapsody on Mamdani, and thank you for the opportunity. So I think we have time for one more question. I would love a non-masculine presenting person to ask a question. If you feel that that's you, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I feel like you started to tease this out already, and at first I thought maybe it's been teased enough, but I think there's space for more. So you've talked about structural interventions and how some of those also come with process interventions in a way. What does the change in space mean for how people interact? And also through Mamdani's campaign, how do they see New York anew, see themselves in the city, see themselves together maybe differently? And if we're thinking in a utopian way, Mamdani is one figure over a certain period of time. And so I'm wondering if there are more ways, thinking about like Cindy's examples, for example, that this catalyzes something or leads to a more long-term process change in how people engage in New York, the city, and with each other. And if there are any examples either coming from the particular interventions that you proposed, many of which I think you already brought up, what are the natural kind of interactions that will happen in those spaces, but also maybe there are other interventions you've been thinking about, or maybe some of the conversations you've been having now tease out longer term effects. If we could dream about what a New York would look like, that's not just Mamdani's New York, but everyone's New York with the support of Mamdani.
Anybody want to start us off? Everybody's New York.
Everybody's New York. Well, I mean, one way that I'm hearing your question is like, sure, this guy's going to be mayor for 4 or 8, or if one of the ballot initiatives passes, maybe 11 years. So what about after that? And I have been thinking that this was the first time that I know of ever since we created rent stabilization that somebody said the rent stabilized rents are not going up during my entire term. Is anybody ever going to be able to not say that again in the future? Or like, no, all of the buses are going to be free. We're not lowering the rate. We're not doing one line again, which we already did. We're doing all of them. I don't know that he's going to do any of these things, but like the fact that he could pitch something that big was breaking a taboo that I don't know. Basically, unless I think he is so phenomenally crushed by the Trump administration, putting that possibility aside, no one will ever be able to not do that again and be taken seriously, and I like that idea.
Two things that are related come to mind. I think, one, I'll be curious to see how social services are treated under his admin. I think for many, many administrations, that has always been sort of this chess move that happens when budget season comes around in terms of the state of libraries and other things. And I think because so much of his campaign to date has been oriented towards delivering services and benefits to New Yorkers, I hope that within that framing, that also considers like the spaces that New Yorkers use regularly and the ways in which we can sustain that financially in like a real tangible way. You know, libraries open on Sundays, cooling centers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think besides that, number two, or B, what I hope comes out of this is that moving forward, there is this sense of like city as a school, or city as a site of learning or understanding of politics, of systems, of what makes it possible for a place like this to exist. And I'm not just saying this because I see Dan and Jay in the audience, but I'm thinking about, you know, a place like, or like the history of a place like Center for Urban Pedagogy, and how so much of that organization is tied to this sort of investigatory lens and like an understanding of like a place as a site of history and learning, and creating ways for especially young people, but I think people from all stripes, to like understand the systems that shape their lives, and also understand it enough to then be able to contest it, to push against it, to critique it, to make shifts in it. And I think that what he's done to date is really activated people around thinking about like what happens in the city, like what are the systems that make life here happen. And so I hope that's something that we continue to move, that continues to move with us in the future. And I hope that also means that we get to a place where more than 30% of registered voters vote. And not that that is the only scale of civics, but if that is something that changes in light of people caring more about civics and governance and like what happens in the city, I think that's gonna be a powerful shift for, you know, generations to come.
Maybe just one brief thing to bring it back to the physical realm, thinking about young people and thinking about where we started with the Brooklyn Museum stairs. I think there's also, you've pointed to that, the very real physical experience, you know, whether it's 4 years or 4 months or 8 years or 11 years of possibility, you know, to sound very corny, perhaps, you know, those experiences, no matter what comes after, are then something that everyone who has had those conditions of freedom and possibility in those spaces will continue to hold on to as something that happened and that is also possible going forward. So I think that there is a very long-term proof of concept, at the very least, right, that's possible.
Yeah, just along those lines, that we don't, it will be wonderful to have Mamdani's New York, but we don't need to have everything top down, and in fact it won't be, but it could create a sort of liberating ether in which we who organize or teach or think of the city as school, or this, you know, the school in and of the city, would start programs or participate in programs like the DGEI, which it galvanized dozens of kids in understanding their neighborhoods, in understanding why the geography looked the way it did, why investments were flowing the way they were, and then doing something about it, and spurring an interest in creating a radical kind of free community college. And those things are available to us, and all going on outside of the 300,000 people, including the 300,000 people. Everyone from Cincinnati will come here and help us. But one thing about having a sense of possibility, a horizon for something different, is so important to all the kind of organizing that people are doing, that all of probably everyone in this room is involved in, and not to feel like you're doing this and there's just the clamp down over it. And so I think that it will create and keep creating those possibilities for all kinds of great things that can be done.
I just very quickly, just wanted to jump in and sort of on this note. I just wanted to linger just a little bit longer on this image of the NYPD barricade turned on its head to become a bench, because you know, for me, this is just the most beautiful encapsulation of a kind of you know, the city that we make together. So I think we will leave it there. Let's have one more round of applause for our illustrious panel.
You know, stick around for a little while, drink some more wine, have some snacks, talk to our panelists, and let's keep building pool party progressivism together. Thank you.